hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we hear you.
Great. Lovely, thank you. So I'd like to extend a very warm greeting to everyone and welcome to this webinar on access and equity, which has been organized by the Magna Carta Observatory. And this is the third of several that have been planned. Some of you may have been participants in the previous ones. As we gather, we remember the very many who have been victims of COVID-19, and in particular, those who have lost their lives, and many others who have suffered great hardship during this time. So I'd like to begin with a few announcements first, some of which have already appeared on the welcome screen. So the seminar is being recorded and will be available through the links on the MCO and WAHED websites in a day or so. It is also recommended that participants use the speaker view, and this option will be on your screen or on the functions tab. You're invited to put questions and make comments, and these can be put on the chat function at any time during the presentations. And as we go along, I will sift out some of the most interesting of these and put them to the speakers, or all of them if there aren't too many. If a question is directed to any particular speaker, you're welcome to indicate as such, and I will direct it to the particular speaker. It is also recommended that you use the mute function to avoid inadvertent disturbances to the speakers. And participants may also keep their videos on or off as you wish. If you have bandwidth issues or poor connection, then it is advisable to switch the video off. That normally improves the connection. This concludes the announcements that I wanted to make. Now, at the last count, we had 291 participants who registered for the webinar from an amazing 67 different countries. It's truly an amazing feat to bring so many of us from such diverse backgrounds and in different jurisdictions. Now, colleagues and friends, this webinar is indeed timely and apposite, occurring almost a year after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in each of the jurisdictions that we operate in, we have encountered the many challenges that emanated from completing the academic year, in switching to remote forms of teaching and learning, in providing adequate learning support to our students, and in completing year-end exams timelessly and also credibly. Disrupted academic programs have thrown starting dates for the next academic year into disarray. Schooling has been disrupted, and delayed completion of the school year, coupled with economic hardship for many, has also presented problems for access to the new intake into our universities. The economically disadvantaged have suffered the most during this period. So the issues of access and equity are reflected unequivocally in the Magna Carta Universitatum 2020. And it is indeed timely that we gather to reflect on on access and student success and how these have been impacted upon by the pandemic. There is much we have learned and also much that we can share. The MCO, with more than 900 signatories worldwide, is a powerful vehicle for us to share our experiences and also to collectively reflect on the road ahead. And I take this opportunity to thank David and his team for making this event possible and for bringing us all together. I'm pleased now to be able to introduce our illustrious panel of speakers in the order in which they will speak. First up, we will have Graham Atherton, who is Director of the National Educational Opportunities Network and global organizer of WAHED. Second, we will have Julian Ledesma, who is Executive Director of the Center for Educational Equity and Excellence at the University of California, Berkeley in the USA. Third, we will have Professor N.V. Varghese, who is Vice Chancellor of the National University of Educational Planning and Administration in Delhi in India. And finally, we will have Marcelo Noble, who is a member-elect of the MCO Governing Council, and in his substantive role is the rector of the University of Campinas in Brazil. Fuller biographies are to be found in the program document that Carla has sent you. Each speaker will be invited to speak for 10 minutes, after which we will go into open forum, where they will respond to questions and comments which participants may make utilizing the chat function. And once each of the speakers finishes his presentation, we will proceed to the next speaker without further intervention from me. So without further ado, I call upon Graham Atherton to speak to us. Graham.
Thank you, Narendra. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully now. I need to have...
Carla is in charge.
But she needs to tell me I can share my screen, but no. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, so okay. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Equitable Access After the Pandemic, Better or Worse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little bit on a piece of research which I undertook late last year, utilising the links that WAHED has. For those of you who aren't aware, World Access to Education Day is something that my organisation NEON in the UK convenes. We have had 3, I think, World Access to Education Days, or WAHED so far. And the aim of WAHED is to act as a catalyst for local and regional action to support more equitable access to education. And what we do is we work with partners across the world to events and activities on WAHED. It's in 17th of November this year, I think, is the next WAHED. We're building up to that with a series of other discussion-based events. So building up to last year's event, what we did is we undertook a piece of research in partnership with an organisation or a foundation in the United Kingdom called the Sutton Trust. And the purpose of this research is to try and gauge a little bit of the response of universities and policymakers to the impact of COVID-19 on university access and student success. So what did we do in this piece of research? We undertook a survey of 45 countries and we surveyed experts in all those different countries. As you see there, it was a global spread, countries broadly. We had 24 from Asia and South America, 5 from Africa, 2 North America, and 14 in Europe. We were taken late last year, looking at the impacts of COVID-19 on access to education for those from low income and marginalised backgrounds, and the success of these students when in higher education. So what were our key findings in our research? The key findings were, I'll just go back a little more. Of the countries surveyed, as you would expect, in the majority of cases, university admissions have been disrupted. We see, of course, with the pandemic, obviously a genuine cross-sectoral impact on education is concerned. At one point in time, the vast majority of school-age pupils, my university students in the world, were not in school. The consequences of that miss of schooling, the consequences of disruption in examinations, was disruption in university admissions processes. Despite the fact that admission processes differ across the world, we saw in the majority of cases disruption in some form of examination cancellation. And that, of course, is continuing. Here in the UK, we will be, for students entering higher education next year, in 2021. Usually, that is mainly in the form of the results after the upper secondary leaving examination. That won't be the case, and it'll be teacher grade predictions. In 6% of countries in our survey anyway, some form of additional financial support was in place for low-income students. At the time of the survey, of the 21 countries who were members of the OECD, only 2 were not providing additional financial support. One of those actually was England, but since then they have provided some level of additional support for their students. And of course, in the vast majority of countries, courses are put online as a result of the pandemic, but evidence-specific provision for low-income students was low. So while obviously we saw a natural pivot to online provision, we still saw huge issues. I saw other speakers were picking up today on the issue of the digital divide. I think we also saw a developed understanding of the nature of this digital divide, moving beyond access to data or hardware, but also, of course, encompassing skills, encompassing ability of finding study place, the ability of students to individually access devices, and also a cultural difference in terms of how different groups engage with online information. This is a brief table which just shows some of the responses of some of the countries we surveyed, and shows the different sorts of responses and different levels of additional support provided for students. Noticeable, of course, there in that table, the majority of those countries there do come from richer nations globally. Yet in the report, there were some examples as well of those countries which have lower per capita incomes who had actually undertaken efforts to support their students. So if you look at the full report, you'd be able to see, if you look for it, you would see that actually there is some examples, not just from more well-off nations, but also from those lower per capita income of efforts, not all of them by any means, but some examples of efforts to put additional resource in supporting students and some additional focus on those students from low income and marginalised background. That's some things were happening. However, of course, we see in our responses here from one of our respondents, I think the view was from institutions, it needs to be normal that all students have access to devices and data. It's probably that blended learning is going to become dominant, so it's critical that marginalised students' skills and their competence of online learning is developed. As we see, I think when we move forward post the pandemic, we have to consider not just access to physical equipment, but more broad perceptions of what digital access and coming digital divides actually means. We need to see further examples, though, of policy initiatives to try and move from the pandemic to a situation where we see equity being addressed with renewed vigour. We see here an example of the current equity task force from California. And I don't know how the task force is progressing, maybe Julie will know more than I do, but in the survey it came through as an interesting example of a policy commitment which put equity at its heart and access. Okay, so that's generally the final slide, and just to finish off, I guess, the question really is, looking at the survey, what does it give us any indication of whether emerging through the pandemic we will see greater inequities in access and success in higher education, or attempts to address equity and access to education being renewed and given greater energy and greater focus and attention. Clearly, on the deficit side, if you like, the loss in learning that many those in schools have experienced, due to being absent from school and having to work off at home and not having the same level of support, will impinge far greater on those learners from low income and marginalised backgrounds. This may well affect their progression to higher education. At the same time, a move to online learning or blended learning may well also have impacts on learners who possibly would require or prefer to have a more face-to-face level of contact. On the deficit side as well, the economic implications for providers of HE, the pandemic, may also bear down upon certain communities and groups, but more likely to enter such providers. Those providers who are possibly in the not-for-profit or private or blended space. Now we can have a lot of separate debate about the merit of such providers, and possibly some may argue that economic impacts on those providers in terms of rationalising those who offer less significant provision would be a good thing. But overall, of course, the economic impact on governments, on societies, will filter through to higher education. This again, of course, may restrict the funds we have to support learners from different backgrounds to enter. On the plus side, we've seen examples in this brief run through the research of, in some countries, a renewed possibly awareness of the financial challenges that and renewed awareness isn't confined to countries with higher per capita income, or we're examples of other countries where this renewed emphasis was found. At the same time as well, there may be examples of different innovations in provision, maybe offer opportunities for new communities to engage. You shouldn't necessarily see innovations in online and blended learning as a priori a bad thing. They may also offer opportunities for new forms and more flexible learning, flexible provision to appeal and be appropriate for groups of students. Yet at the same time, of course, the extent of the challenges we are going to face in terms of retaining progression opportunities for groups in low-income and marginalised backgrounds cannot be discounted. I was only at a different seminar this morning where I heard a speaker who worked with Before I Respect from UNESCO, actually, in Latin America and Caribbean, talking about possibly the dangers of a lost decade of progress that's been made where equitable access is concerned and access is concerned as a result of what's happened in the last 2 years. It makes it increasingly important, I think, as was said in the introduction, that we do continue this vigorous global conversation and discussion regarding equitable access to education and success. So the grave danger is, as we do start to emerge from the pandemic, as hopefully we will do, that, as has been always the case to a degree, issues of equity are lost in the conversation beyond other broader concerns. So I'll stop at that point. That's about my 10 minutes. I want to keep up to time and allow you to move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm going to ask Carla if you can also make me co-host so I can begin to share my screen as well. Thank you. So let me get situated here. All right, I think I'm set up there. So once again, it's so great to be here with you all. My institution is UC Berkeley. It's a large public research university with over 40,000 students, 3/4 of which are undergraduates. UC Berkeley was the first of 10 University of California campuses. It was established in 1868. It's a public institution focused on education, research, and public service. I want to kind of set a context for you as I talk about some of the work we do in support of students as practitioners. Some additional facts about Berkeley. Admission to Berkeley remains competitive. Only 17% of eligible applicants are admitted every year. Right now, the estimated undergraduate annual cost of attendance is roughly $40,000 per year. About 25% of our undergraduates are first-generation college students. Nearly a third are considered low-income students. 20% of our undergraduates are considered underrepresented ethnic minority, and 22% of our undergraduates come to us as transfer students. My area, the Centers for Educational Equity and Excellence, and we refer to it as CE3, is a cluster of comprehensive programs offering academic planning, advising, personal counseling, financial aid guidance, supplemental financial aid, and scholarships to support historically marginalized students that may include former foster youth, student veterans, student parents, undocumented students, and others. Here you see the various programs that are a part of CE3, including the Educational Opportunity Program, EOP, our Transfer Student Center, and others. It's also important to note that at Berkeley, more than 13,000 students identify with one or more of our programs. And I really believe that our comprehensive support and holistic approach is even more critical in the Bay Area of Northern California, where we're located. as it's one of the world's most expensive regions to live. And when you talk about the work that we do, we are concerned with the whole student and feel we cannot compartmentalize the academic aspects of their lives away from the whole of their lives, of their other lived experiences. And so this visual here shows you, let me zoom in just a bit, the various areas of presenting issues that our staff and our programs routinely address. We call this approach academic counseling. I also refer to it as aspirational academic counseling. And when you review this visual, you start to realize that we work with, again, not just the academic components of a student's life, but issues of connection to community, of identity, of belonging, of equity. And again, I think it's important to note that traditional advising is only one aspect of the many ways that we support students. Another way to understand the holistic and comprehensive nature of aspirational academic counseling is through the various models and theories that inform it. And here you see some of the 5 core or primary models and frameworks that inform our work, things such as transition theory, cultural wealth model, social justice framework. And again, when you see both these models and frameworks and also the presenting issues, kind of the wheelhouse of work for our connection to students, I think you begin to understand that how the need for the type of support we offered became even more critical to historically marginalized students at Berkeley during the pandemic. So a few weeks into remote operations, we launched a CE3 student survey so our students could tell us directly what they were experiencing and what they needed from us. UC Berkeley as a campus also launched several efforts to collect student input to learn what students were experiencing. And right away, we began to hear from students and that began to shape our response to it as well. So I won't read the entire comment, but I do want to share, parts of it. A student tells us, I need professors to understand that at the moment, we as students are not worried about academics or our grades. We are worried about the health of our families and our friends. I need community. I need hugs. The lack of community will have deep and resounding impacts. So right away, again, this is the type of feedback and our experience with students that began to shape our response in terms of how we were going to support students moving forward in this new environment. And we now know that what we were seeing and learning is reflected in the national data as well. So recently, the Hope Center just completed a national survey that identifies many of the same things and some of the same challenges we were seeing at Berkeley. Things like students opting out of enrollments by canceling or withdrawing, an elevated need in paying for essentials related to food and housing, unreliable or non-existent access to learning technology and the internet, and home environments that were not conducive to learning, challenges transitioning to online learning as the sole modality, something that many of our students were not familiar with. And of course, we work with students that often experience some degree of these types of challenges pre-pandemic. So the COVID-19 environment just made things worse. And it's with that perspective that I think we can summarize what we learned about our students' experiences during COVID. Existing inequities just got worse. The students we work with were increasingly concerned about how to pay for essentials. And the students we work with were increasingly reporting levels of emotional distress. And I think you could see that in another survey that our campus just recently completed. What you're seeing is some results, I think some striking results from a fall 2020 semester survey. And this survey was administered over, we have a 15-week semester and then a couple of additional weeks for final examinations. This survey was administered 4 weeks apart, with the final survey being administered during final examinations. And again, I think you see the responses related to depressive disorder and general anxiety are pretty striking. They're pretty high. It's also important to note, these are the averages that you're seeing on this visual. The rates for low-income students, for underrepresented ethnic minority students are 5 to 7% higher than the average rates across the general student population. There's also an interesting pattern here that we noted in terms of, or after the trend of going up, there was this dip in survey number 4. So we don't quite know why that is. Again, this is relatively new data that we need to explore it a bit further. There's some interesting theories. One theory is that because that final survey happened during final examinations, as a matter of fact, some respondents probably had completed final examinations, were students responding almost after a sigh of relief of completing the semester. And so they reported less feelings of anxiety and depression. There's another theory that by the time you got to final examinations. Those students that were more severely impacted by the pandemic could have been some of the students who canceled their enrollment and opted out. Therefore, they were no longer respondents. Therefore, they impacted the response rate. So again, very interesting, and we need to dig into the data a bit more, but again, quite striking results and tell us kind of the impact of the pandemic on our students. For us, in terms of how we responded to what we were seeing, both in our day-to-day practice with students and in light of seeing this data, one of the first things we did was to mobilize emergency relief. One of the things that we did was we do have our programs, do have some dollars for things like emergency grants. We also realized early on many of the things that we had planned and budgeted for in person, workshops, events, work-related travel, admissions-related travel, we were not going to be able to do that this year. So we pulled all that money together along with some existing dollars, and we made about $150,000 available directly to students in the form of emergency support via electronic gift cards, primarily to pay for food for students. We also helped the campus develop a larger and ongoing emergency relief fund, and we connected students with that. This was funded partly through some of the CARES Act funding that Graham mentioned earlier. The other thing that we did parallel to that immediately, as we knew we were moving into remote operations, was to establish virtual versions of our services. So the very first thing we did was to move the one-on-one counseling appointments to a Zoom environment, but also moving our transition workshops and programming to online course formats. We also created virtual front desks in order to triage quick questions, have students have an opportunity to get a quick response, an immediate response, but also have the opportunity to connect with staff one-on-one. And the other thing that we did was create community spaces. We know that students, and we heard from students, they wanted more than just guidance. They wanted the ability to connect with other fellow students to create virtual community. So we did that as well. We also connected students with resources to address their technology needs. Our campus did also establish an emergency tech fund. Some of our programs also have dollars that help support that need as well. So we connected folks with that. And another thing that was very important for us was to work with our campus leadership and advising offices and the faculty to really advocate for and push for more flexibility in academic policies and academic deadlines. One example being giving more flexibility to students regarding the grading option. So students have the ability to take a pass, no pass versus a letter grade, which again, many students valued within this uncertain environment. So as I begin to close, I also want to leave you with kind of the implications from what we're learning and how what we learn can shape the future and what we think might be best as we anticipate what that future might look like. I think for all of us, students and staff, there's a greater appreciation of being in person, the value of being in person, and as we return to in-person environments and knowing that we won't completely return immediately to a 100% in-person environment, to be very thoughtful about how we facilitate those finite in-person opportunities. The other thing, again, building off of what Graham mentioned in terms of blended learning, there's also blended support that I believe students will come to expect and demand, a mix of virtual and in-person support. So that's something I think we need to think about. What's best in a virtual environment? What can we not replicate as well in a virtual environment? And that will be hold it in the in-person environment. And the other items are a bit more structural. I think that this moment has taught us, at least for us, that the university is not structured to handle crisis well. Part of this is because pre-pandemic, there were many inequities that only worsened during the pandemic. So I think this is an opportunity for us to address those inequities, to work on a financial aid system that's more expansive, that's more inclusive, for faculty and leadership to be more understanding and responsive, not just to crisis, but to the challenges and inequities that many of the students we work with face. So I think it's an opportunity just to make things better overall. Yes, to prepare us for the next crisis, but just to make things more equitable overall. I think that'll require some courage. I think that'll require some bold leadership. And I think that involving ourselves with these conversations, the things that are happening around the world, really, I hope will push us towards that as well. So that concludes my time. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the following presentations.
Hello, can I start?
Yes, please do, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to address or discuss some of the issues related to COVID and its impact on higher education. I will try to focus on 3 dimensions of the impact. One, in terms of admissions. Two, what happened to the students who are already inside the system. And three, what happened to the students who graduated from the system in the same year, Coming to the first issue, I think before I start, I should say that one of the major issue that was confronted by the countries, developing country like India, is that large scale migration or the migrants who are in the cities when the pandemic started and when the lockdown started, they were forced to return to their places. And they not only lost the job, they had no place to live. And as a result of that, a lot of people were on the street, So that was a very, very human dimension of the pandemic. So far as the schools are concerned, it had an impact in terms of when India has what is called as a midday meal scheme. That means the students are given food during the lunch time. And this is mostly the students who are availing this facility are the most disadvantaged groups in the society, most disadvantaged groups who are coming to the schools. Right? All the students need not have to take the midday meal scheme. Once the schools are closed down, these students lost midday meals. This is millions and millions of students, they really suffered, not only an educational suffering as a result of the educational disruption, but also suffering as a result of the food scarcity or non-availability of food. In many cases, it is not an exaggeration that the only good meal that the children used to have is the midday meal from the schools. That was another issue. This is also not confined to the students at the primary level and the school level. India has also a system of what is called as separate hostels for students from the disadvantaged groups. When the universities closed the hostels, the same thing was replicated. The same thing was repeated for adult students, youth students who are studying in the colleges and the universities. Now, coming to the admissions and the change in the enrollment, it is very difficult to make a clear assessment regarding what is the extent to which there is a decline in the enrollment. Because in many cases, if not in most cases, the universities are not.
Am I the only one struggling to hear?
Sorry? Hello, can you hear me?
For
Hello.
a moment I lost you, but are others struggling?
No, I don't think so.
Are others struggling to hear?
No,
Well, now we can hear you.
you can hear
Okay.
perfectly.
Let me
All
switch
right,
off the
fine.
video.
Sorry, what I was trying to implicate or what I was trying to say is that, it is very difficult to make an assessment regarding the extent of decline in enrollments since most of the universities have not reopened. Some of the universities continue their courses on an online mode. We should have reopened in September, but some of them continue on online mode. But what is more important is that India has two major national examinations for entrance. One is called joint entrance examination, which is for normally for the engineering education. And there is another examination called NEET, National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, NEET, that is mostly for the medical and paramedical education. And these two are the large examinations attended by large number of students, running into thousands of students take these examinations. There were street fights in India by the students to say that the examination should not be held, it should be postponed. There is a national testing agency which is conducting these examinations. There were requests to National Testing Agency not to have the examinations. But the Supreme Court of India decided that the examinations will not be postponed and the examinations were held. As a result of that, many newspaper reports indicate that a large number of students from the rural areas could not participate in the examinations because these examinations are held in certain selected centers which are located in the urban areas. And the students from the rural areas found it very difficult to travel. And at that point of time, the transport facilities were also blocked. And secondly, the staying facilities in the hostels or in the hotels were also blocked. And as a result of that, if you want to write the examination, you had to come on the start from home on the same day and come to the city and write, which was not possible for thousands of students. So there were street fights, and as a result of that, we feel that those students who did not have car or those students who did not have relatives in the urban areas to stay with, they found that it is very difficult to appear for these examinations. This will have a lot of implication, or in other words, the admissions to these courses, prestigious courses of engineering and medical education may be more skewed this time than what it used to be in the previous years. That is something which is very important. One of the major pattern of change that we find in the universities is that all the universities moved to online courses. The second dimension is that most of the hostels were closed. And I think this has a national dimension and international dimensions. When the hostels were closed, many students, even the national students, did not have a place to go and stay. And they could not even go to their friends' places because they were also not welcome. During the COVID period, nobody was welcome to the household, So it was a very difficult situation. Say, for example, in universities like ours, although it is small, we have a regular international program. Our concern was how to keep the hostels open. I think that's a point that I wanted to emphasize. While the whole university system, higher education institutions in the country was struggling to close down the institutions and hostels, our effort was to see that these hostels are remaining open. What will you do with the international participants? And till the last participant left for the country, we were really tense and nervous, because if they get COVID, and how they can be taken care of, So this is a very different situation that we had. And also secondly, getting the food, since most of the markets were closed, and since most of the, especially non-vegetarian items were not available. So it was very difficult for us to manage the hostel. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us is to keep the international students, All the classes were held online. We did not face any problem. The transition of the international students was very good, smooth in terms of the online courses. But this is not the case with most of the students from in the country, especially at the undergraduate level. In many of the universities, they found it very difficult to continue the courses online because many students did not have computers at home. And therefore, the most important and reliable technology which facilitated the transaction of classes was perhaps the mobile technology, or in other words, mobile technology had a more democratizing effect of education during the pandemic period than the computer technology had. And many students had to sit outside the home, in the fields, in the forest to get connection, because the connectivity was also very limited. This also had a lot of implication for teachers. The students used to submit their assignments, etc., through mobile, and it was very difficult for the teachers also to evaluate it. And many teachers are also not tech savvy, and as a result of that, they also found it very difficult to manage in the initial stages. Even when they could manage, they found that the workload has increased substantially, and as a result of that, there were quite a lot of difficulties. Now, coming to the examinations, in many places, what some of the universities have taken the position that you need not have to cover the whole syllabus. You need not have to cover the whole curriculum meant to be covered in the particular year. You cover only 70% of the curriculum. In some places, the examination results were liberalized. It's something you'll get a pass mark, that type of things. So therefore, there is a dilution in terms of the quality that we are talking about the educational system. But more important task or challenge before everybody was to continue with some form of education or a feeling of semblance of education that is continuing. Now, if I come to the third dimension, that is about the graduation rates. Students got graduated. At the secondary school, the graduation rates did not decline. Perhaps it was maintained or gone up marginally. So we doubt whether it is because of grade inflation or as a result of the better performance of the students because they got a lot of time to study at home. But however, in the employment market, the situation was very pathetic in the sense that not only that the jobs disappeared, there was no possibility of recruitment taking place at that point of time, So the graduates who graduated this year in 2020, not this year, last year, 2020, found it very, very difficult for people to get into any jobs, And even in these cases, you find that we had disadvantaged groups like scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward communities, people living in the rural and remote areas. These were the people who are finding it more difficult to find jobs than those people who are normally associated with or engaged in or living in the urban areas. Further, we had a terrible economic, negative economic growth problem. I think the third quarter of 2020, our economic growth was minus 24%, that is GDP growth rate. Things have improved marginally, but even then we find that this is substantially reduced growth rate. And as a result of that, we have found that the budgetary allocations in general declined, and even for education, it declined. Although this is the year we were all expecting much higher allocation because we had a new education policy that came into operation in 2020. So this has also combined with the economic difficulties that are faced by the country. We are in a very difficult situation. To end with, sir, I am ending within 30 seconds. To conclude, I will say that many of these changes that have taken place may remain. The online mode of transactions, the blended mode of teaching learning processes, and many of these changes that has taken place may remain. And getting back to the pre-COVID levels of brick and mortar system of universities and colleges will be very difficult in the immediate future. It may take 2 or 3 years to come back to the pre-COVID stage of higher education development in the country. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's my turn now. My name is Marcelo Knobel. I am the rector, the president of the University of Campinas in Brazil. I am actually ending my term. Here we have a limited 4-year terms. And Julian mentioned the survey of emotional distress from the students. I would guess that here, if we make an emotional distress survey of the university leadership, it will also have very astonishing numbers, because we are facing a very complicated and difficult times. I could eventually share with you some of the things that we have been doing in Brazil, but I was asked to give a more general talk. And as I am presenting a little bit more of the Magna Carta Universitatum, I would like to share with you an experience that as soon as I started as a rector 4 years ago, I went to a conference, an international conference, and one of the rectors there that was in his position for, I would say, 10 or 15 years, he asked me, "Well, are you a new rector? So did they give you the captain outfit? Did they give you the cap of the ship? So you're the captain now." So as soon as you started your position, you realized that you took the helm, the timon, and it was connected to nothing. So the ship was completely on its own wheel. This was the situation I was facing during that time. The complexity of the university, the complexity of leading a rather big university is rather strong. And in fact, I was feeling like it was very hard to navigate in this complicated ocean. The problem with when the pandemic came, I remembered that image or this analogy, and now we are in a similar situation, but with a little bit more of problems. So we have now not only a complicated ship or in an ocean to navigate, but it's more than a ship. It's a transatlantic, and we are in a mist, in a fog. There is a storm, and we are under attack, and the ship hull has a hole. So everything is happening in this analogy together with the complexity of running a university. And I was thinking a lot on that issue, and I realized that which is the best way in order to find a light at the end of the tunnel. How can we really keep our hopes, our mission in these very difficult times? So the only way, in my opinion, is to keep and return to the basics of the university, its mission and their values. So this is what I would like to share with you a little bit more. It's important from the point of view of the Magna Carta Universitatum, which is an organization that takes care of these very important aspects of universities, which are usually in our everyday, day-to-day life. It's very hard to stop and to think back and to see a broader perspective of the mission of the university and the values of the university. And this is an important point in my opinion, to try to look at right now, when we don't know what will happen in the near future. So in our university, we were working with WAHED in order to deal and to work with these issues of access and completion for the students, but also with Magna Carta. We participated in a very interesting project called the Living Values Project at the university, where we discussed within the university which are the updated values of the university in the current times. So have you ever discussed these issues again during these pandemic times, during the complicated times that we are facing? So this is something that I would like to share with you that for us it was really, really important. Just to give you an example, connecting to what Professor Varghese just mentioned to us, I received it during this period. Well, of course, we went online. We started to make remote, emergency remote mode, and so on, as many of universities that are present here have done. But I received a very interesting message from one of our students who said, look, I am a really, really poor student. And for me, this situation is better than ever. I was surprised to say, how can this can be? He said, look, I travel, I have to commute every day to the university, 2.5 hours to reach the university and 2.5 hours to return from the university. And when the help that you provide me with a computer and a connection to the internet, I am saving now 5 hours of my day. So for me, the situation, I would like that this situation would be always like this one. So this is the kind of situation that we have to deal and try to find, lessons from this perspective. The important point here is that the inequalities that we face in our countries, in our university, they were present. They were there before the pandemic. And then, of course, they are now more, clear to everyone. They are more oppressed, but they are there and they were there, always there. And this is something that we should call our attention. To end, I would like to call your attention to the material that we all received from this seminar. And I would like to really call your attention to that. It's very important, the participation of all the institutions, all the university in this international and connected effort. I believe that we should work together as institutions in order to make us stronger. In the new Magna Carta that is going to be launched in June 2021, I would read here, which is, I believe it's really, really strong and important. Universities are non-discriminatory spaces of tolerance and respect, where diversity of perspectives flourishes and where inclusivity, anchored in principles of equity and fairness, prevails. They therefore commit themselves to advance equity and fairness in all aspects of academic life, including admissions, hiring, and promotion practices. Education is a human right, a public good, and should be available to all. Universities recognize that learning is a lifelong activity with tertiary education as one part of a continuum. Within that one part, universities serve diverse learners at all stages of their lives. Universities acknowledge that individuals and communities, often due to inequitable circumstances, have difficulty gaining access to higher education or influencing the modes and matter of academic study. To realize human potential everywhere, universities deliberately seek ways to welcome and engage with diverse voices and perspectives. So I think this is a very strong statement that it's in the Magna Carta Universitatum, and for the universities that didn't sign the Magna Carta yet, you are more than welcome to do so. It's very important, the participation of everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Right. I'd like to thank the speakers for keeping to time by and large. So that's left us a good amount of time, at least half an hour, to engage them and to put questions to them and to even make comments. So I'd like to begin also just to remind you to use the chat function to put your questions or comments. I've been monitoring the chat function, and there's a whole lot of very warm and excited greetings, but very few questions. So just a reminder to post your questions. So let me begin then with, I think it's Luis Computaro, who puts this question. Anxiety and depression in students is due to the pandemic, the new century, or the new generation. We are facing generations with less resilience, and that's put as a question. Are we facing generations with less resilience? He doesn't make clear who that is directed at, but I suspect it was Julian, because he was addressing those issues. Then the second question comes from Albert Schramm, who raises the following question. It's an inspirational overview from UC Berkeley on student welfare. How many of these activities is your university undertaking successfully? That's also to Julian. Then another question, or continuation of his earlier question, also from Luis. The students for the pandemic, or the teachers for not leaving their comfort zone. And this relates to, I don't fully grasp the question. I hope it's not formulated in a way that perhaps makes it easy to convey. But I think that he is drawing the conclusion from the presentation that someone cannot achieve adaptability. So is this the students for the for the pandemic, or is it the teachers for not leaving their comfort zone? So it's about the question about adaptability and whose dilemma that is. And then I'll take one more from Jeanette Buota, who's from South Africa. So even where some of these initiatives are in place, universities have little control over study circumstances at home. And this is very stressful, especially in disadvantaged communities. The lack of decent devices and connectivity is an ongoing reality that must be addressed. Communication also, to ensure that some level of ongoing connection and a sense of inclusiveness assumes greater importance in this time. So there are specific questions directed at Julian, and then others which the rest of the panel may address. So I invite you, starting with Julian, and then whoever else wishes to respond from the panel.
Thank you.
Julian, over to you.
Thank you. So I'll address Luis's question first regarding anxiety and depression. And again, I think, just setting the context that I'm definitely speaking from an American public university perspective, and particularly at a competitive and high achieving student university like UC Berkeley. And this question of is anxiety and depression due to the pandemic, the new century, or new generation? I would probably say a bit of both, and a bit of each of those and more. I can also tell you that those rates that you saw, that 38%, 44%, 50% regarding anxiety and general depression, the rates pre-pandemic are about 15% lower than that. So 30% is still, in some cases, is still a significant number. So we know students, particularly the students we work with that are low income and first generation, are experiencing it. And I think sometimes the question is asked, are they experiencing more anxiety, more depression, or are they just more comfortable reporting it now than they were years ago? I also think with this question, we just want to be careful with the notion of resilience. My simple answer to are these generations less resilient is no. I think they are extremely resilient. I think there's more things to overcome. What we ask students to do, particularly at a place like Berkeley, where the university is less affordable, where there are stressors regarding equity or belonging. When you talk, for example, about our African-American, Black student population being less than 3% of our total community, what does it do to a student's experience navigating that space when you don't have other students that look like you? And so I think there are so many different things that impact so many things that students have to navigate that I think we need to be careful with this notion of resilience. I believe students are more resilient, but I also think sometimes the concept of resilience is a way for universities not to take ownership and accountability over what they need to do to best support students and put them in a place to be successful. And the second question from Albert regarding how successful some of these activities are, I think others on the panel may mention that in some ways it's too early to tell, right? And also depends how you are measuring and defining success. For us, one of the things we've been tracking is enrollment, and enrollment as a function of revenue, which is obviously important for us to keep operations going. We were involved, our CE3 unit, with our campus registrar in an effort to engage students who were enrolled for the fall semester, but maybe weren't enrolled for the spring semester. And it was very interesting because our approach with that was different than the approach from the university. Our approach was simply to reach out to students to say, hey, we noticed you didn't enroll. What's going on? Is there something that we can address to put you in a position where you're able to enroll and feel comfortable doing so? The university's perspective was more, let's get you enrolled because we want to make sure we keep our enrollment numbers at the place they need to be. And so there were many students that we talked to that we came to the mutual conclusion, it is best for you not to be enrolled right now. And we began to set up a relationship to put them in a position down the road to come back. So I really think it depends on how you're defining success. But overall, I think it's about putting students in a position to do their best work at the university. I know some of the impacts for us is, for our students, the time to degree has now increased. So they're going to spend more time, more calendar time, and more enrollment time, which for our students who are low income can mean taking on more debt. So those are real implications and real choices, and we're working through those things as well.
Thank you. Other members of the panel? No comment? Okay, then let us go on to some other questions. So we have one from Elaine, I think it's Laberger. So who asks, what is the pre-COVID situation? And then makes a comment, before COVID, poverty class students have faced relentless discrimination, and this has intensified. Post-COVID, if poverty class students have survived, things will only be worse. Where do poverty class students fit in all of this theory and talk? And then a second question comes from David Locke. What action should rectors be taking to prepare future leaders to cope with emergencies like the pandemic? And perhaps we'll take one more. And this is from Sibold Noda. The pandemic works as a kind of magnifying glass, exposing many challenges to several cohorts of students at universities should take think more seriously, or sorry, take more seriously throughout. So that's a comment from him. So can we have some responses to those before we take a few more?
Yeah,
Yes, I can.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm happy to, on the first question, I mean, I can only interpret that as a discussion regarding the role or voice of students, possibly. I mean, I think that's a crucial part of this discussion. We in WAHED have worked closely with the European Students' Union and also the newly instigated Global Students' Forum to try and ensure that in the work we're taking forward, that students are consulted and part of shaping this debate and this narrative. Where they sit in this theory and talk, well, I don't think this is necessarily a discussion, but this is a discussion, but it's a discussion of action. I mean, I think where the larger challenge sits for us is how we engage those outside of this virtual room. Because within this virtual room, by virtue of the participation, the majority of us are actively involved in work to support all students from different backgrounds prior to the pandemic to enter HE and succeed, and will continue to do so afterwards. Our major challenge really is engaging those outside of this room, particularly when we'll see many conflicting priorities on resource and time emerging as we come out, as we emerge from this situation. And those across institutions, across policymakers will be conflicted in the demands they have to deal with. How do we, I mean, our key pivotal challenge is placing equitable access and participation central to their concerns and our concerns. Michelle, please answer the next question. That was
Yes, I would like to add one important issue regarding, of course, it's very hard to discuss in this kind of diverse environment because each reality is completely different from the other. In our case, we are a public university in São Paulo, Brazil, which is a wealthy state, but we are a public university means that we are completely tuition free for everything. And we provide many helps for the students, poor background students, in order to, they have to complete the university. And during the pandemic, for example, just to mention one example, we provided computers and connection for the students that needed that. More than 1,000 computers and tablets and so on were given and connections as well. And we changed it. For example, we had a financial aid for the students to come to the university, a transport aid every month, something like $50, I would say, if we change that for dollars. And we changed it immediately that for an emergency pandemic help. So about 2,000 students receive something like $50 in order to provide help, in order to connect and to have a better environment, in order to try to keep up with the challenges of the situation that we are facing right now. We changed it also, as mentioned before, the way that we grade, the way that we make the examinations and so on. But one important thing that I would like to put in the table here is that it's very important to challenge the leadership and the faculty members that is completely different to teach online, to have this pandemic situation. The content itself, it's important, but I would say that nowadays we can find this content on YouTube, on different places and so on. It's important to be flexible in this kind of situation. Let me share just one example to try to illustrate what I mean. Instead of having a syllabus followed point by point, hour by hour, I would say that in this period, it would be, and many experiences have done that in order to fulfill the challenges. To make, for example, to propose to the students a project, a community challenge, in order to help communities that are needing help right now, so that they can work on a public and a group activity that could teach them much more than they could receive by any remote online education. So this is the sort of examples that I would say that we should be, as universities, flexible in order to try to fit all the different situations that the students have, and also the lack of perspective that we really don't know where this situation will end up. So this is my main point.
Thank you, Marcelo. Anyone else from the panel wishes to respond to the other questions or add further to the responses that have already been given? Okay,
think, Naren,
then we can take a few more questions. Sorry?
No, I think
Go on.
Varghese speaking. Can you hear me?
Go on. Yes, yes.
I think I want to make a footnote that, with all the difficulties that are faced during the pandemic period, what is to be appreciated is that a semblance of a continuity of education was maintained. Or in other words, there was no total disruption. That is to be appreciated. It may be of low quality. It may not be of completing all the courses. This may be of different type of education that was provided, but at least it is much better than a situation that the year is lost and an academic year is lost, So something is better than nothing. From that point of view, it is very important. Otherwise, there were student strikes and there were prolonged closure of universities where instances of academic year being lost, I think one of the achievement that needs to be understood, even when we are critical about the government and the leaders who continue to save the situation, one thing that is to be appreciated is that at least I have not come across a situation where a full academic year is lost for the students. That is a positive change, and that's a positive aspect that needs to be underlined. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another round of questions, and we have from Ephraim Yildiz, who asks, what kind of teaching methods will your universities apply for the next academic year? His university is going to use the face-to-face, so-called SAFE method. And then again from Elaine Laberger, in Canada, students from poverty are normally forgotten, and even more so now. How can we get Canadian universities to engage with systemic classism? Then we have from Nazima Japi. She prefaces the question with a comment indicating, whilst we are all making every effort to ensure that no student is left behind and have a flexible approach to student participation, my concern is around the one-size-fits-all instructional designs. So the question is, how do we adopt an inclusive, culturally responsive way of teaching in which we instill equity as a value in designing learning experiences and also activating students' cultural capital. And perhaps one more. Do any of the students present have messages for the rectors as to how responses to future pandemics may be better? And that's from David. So can we have responses to those questions that were raised? Who would like to start? I can't see everyone, so if you raise your hand, I may not see you, because I'm using a gallery view and at the same time monitoring the chat room.
Well, I can try to respond to Nazima. I fully agree with Nazima. This is the most important thing that we should think of. I really don't know the answer. It's too complex. But I am sure that we should try to find a way in order to really accommodate the different needs and the different perspectives of different students. I would say that nowadays we are in a completely different situation, in a different world. And we are, as universities and higher education institutions, very very complicated. We have an inertia in order to change. It's very complicated to change things. But I believe that there is a necessity to train and to provide training for the faculty members in order to show them that nowadays this situation has changed. I will give you. I always like to give examples in order to, so you can see what I try to mean. We have in my university, just to make an example, exactly at the same time, we have the Calculus 1 classrooms for all the university. Calculus 1 is it's a mandatory course for many engineerings and mathematics and physics and so on. We have about 20 to 30 faculty members teaching the exactly same class at the same time in the presential period. So this is crazy right now. This could be doing projects together, that could be making other stuff, and the students have the opportunity to learn in YouTube or in a different environment and come together to solve problems and to discuss, make the university more reliable to them. So this is one example that I usually use to say, well, what we are going to do, we are not clear about that, because we really strongly believe that the university environment, the connection between people is fundamental for their learning. I would even try to say, attempt to say that it's more important, the environment, the university environment, the academic environment, than the content itself. But in any case, I believe that we are going probably to a situation of an hybrid system, but it's not clear in which way this will happen. In every university, every place is a different history, a different perspective, and it's probably a strong discussion that will happen in the next few years.
Thank you. Any of the other panel members wish to respond?
Yeah, I could jump in. I know I've been tracking in the chat as well some mention of poverty class students, and to me it really relates to something that I mentioned in my presentation, that the concept really of it shouldn't take a pandemic for us to have focused attention on folks who are don't have the means necessarily to attend the university, who are considered, again, using our nomenclature, low income or poverty class level. And so I completely agree that we have an opportunity to now address that. And I think part of that mix for us is we know that many of our students who are from poverty, the university and the university opportunity, and this is where it gets difficult, because I know depending on local context, for us, it's clear that for our students, having an opportunity for some students, a good portion of those students, to have in-person opportunities is critical for them. For example, we have a student parent center as part of our programs, and we have a university village that offers student parents housing. So it may be for that student and their family the most stable form of housing they have access to. Not to mention the financial aid that they receive for 9 months or 12 months, depending on their enrollments, and how that helps support their experiences. And also the fact that we have created a basic needs center on our campus that we partner with to provide relief and support for essentials such as food, but also working with students to make sure that they have stable housing. So for us, there is that relationship between, there are some things, and there was also a mention of students with disabilities, the issues with access to technology when you have additional need for technology, assistive learning devices, screen readers, and that sort of thing. Well, that need is even greater than for someone who may not present that disability. So for us, there's a connection between some degree of in-person with the way that we're able to address some of those inequities. But again, I think to circle back to my point is that I think that hopefully what this does is, somebody mentioned the phrase magnifying glass, certainly shines a light on these inequities and puts us in a position to not have to wait for the next crisis to address these inequities more urgently.
Thank you. Anything further from the panel? Okay, let's take the other questions. So the first I'd like to draw attention to is from Wangari. Kindly comment on students with disabilities and other special needs. I'm trying to sift out from other conversations that are also taking place. Okay, we have a long comment from Maricel Lord, I think it is. So I believe most are focusing on the teaching and learning strategies, but I've never heard of those discussing the change in learners' numerical assessment or any grading system. Should it not be the best time now to also consider the natural learning environment for them? As I believe learners learn best according to their own phase and preparedness, which is being hindered by pressuring learners on their capacity to finish courses at the same time, expecting passing grades. So can we consider a non-graded system, but instead more of a mastery or flexible learning based on the learner's environment and access to available resources? So that's quite a complex set of issues raised in that. And I don't know who would like to answer that. Yeah, maybe because those are two, there's a cluster of questions there. Perhaps we can take those first, the cluster, and then the other question which I raised. Would like to go first?
Yeah, I'll some of the questions. I mean, I think the issue of assessment, as you point out, that it is a complex one. I think there has been a lot of discussion, I think, particularly in the early parts of the pandemic, regarding the size of the impact of the pandemic on many aspects of society, including higher education, opening up potential for all sorts of new and different forms of future, if you like. This change in an assessment style being one of them. Yeah, of course, what then happens is those thoughts then close down as the situation is normalized, as you develop a more normal aspect to where you are, as you can used to have the pandemic. I mean, the issue of whether you would have mastery or other forms of grading is an interesting one. I mean, again, like all these things, what you need is countries or institutions who have to be brave to try and attempt different ways and take the risks in there. The risks come with student recruitment. You know, would students flow into your institution if, when they came out, they carried things which they weren't clear the labour market will value? Would indeed they see, if they are indeed paying to enter that institution, as many students are, would they see that as a valuable investment or not? Yeah, that doesn't mean it's not a good idea, but what it does need is bravery. And I guess, you know, then there's a choice of those in leadership positions. Is it the time to be brave, or is it time not to be brave? You know, is it time now to see this as building a new future, or is it time to be trenched back to things we already understand? This is where I guess, you know, if you want to see those things taken forward, you press for braver decisions to be made. And then you circulate this, and then you
Thank
try
you, Graham.
discuss them. Sorry.
Right, anyone else from the panel?
Well,
Professor
there,
Verghese, Professor
I think the
Verghese,
grade,
yeah.
yes, I think the grades are becoming increasingly important, whether it is in the context of pass percentages or getting first classes or A's or A minuses, etc. Grades are becoming important, not only to show the level of mastery that is achieved by the students. The market wants to make an assessment of the students. It is not only the institution. And the markets are making assessment based on the scores that you have got in the colleges and universities, and it becomes a screening device. Today, the grades and scores are becoming increasingly the screening device based on which you select students to the next levels, select students to employment, select students to various other activities. So therefore, I am not in favor of non-graded systems. And the system needs to be graded, and that makes the students different. If everybody is getting the same grade, it is no grading at all. And education has a capacity to differentiate one individual from the other. and there is a way in which this is done in the system. And therefore, if you see education as a screening device, the gradations and grading process also need to continue. Then only the market can value different institutions and the students coming from different institutions.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to invite members of the panel who may still wish to make any closing remarks before I take us to closure. Anything that remains unsaid that you wish to share
Yes,
with the
sir.
audience?
I would like to make
Julian?
one comment.
Oh, okay, please go on.
Julian?
Okay, I'm sorry. I think for me, just in closing, I just one of the things that I see as a theme through all this is that we're at a moment of crisis, but from that crisis comes an opportunity to explore our systems, our methods, and from that, I think that one of the common threads that we've talked about is just an opportunity to rethink, to address with some degree of urgency, with some degree of courage, as we've mentioned, these inequities. And again, the idea being that not only would we be prepared for the next crisis, but just make higher education more equitable, more just across the board. So I'm really leaving with that as the spirit and kind of the common thread of our conversation here today.
Thank you, Julian. Marcelo, would you like to go next?
Yes, I can. I would like to thank you all for the attention and the participation in this session. Thank you very much. I would say that I'm trying to follow, discussing at the same time they follow the chat is not an easy task, but the discussions are quite important and interesting. But I would like to stress an important point. We are very diverse universities in a very diverse places with different perspectives, with different backgrounds, and with different ways of governance and ways of financing and so on. And so it's very hard to compare everything, and each single one has a different problem and a different challenge. I would like to stress, though, that we have a common background, that is our mission, as I stated before, and our values, which are fundamental. We are there and we are here to serve society in different ways. One of them is, of course, to help the students and to form the next generation of workers and so on. But there are many other ways that the universities are fundamental for the future of society. We are facing that now, and it's always important to keep that in mind. So returning to my initial consideration, it's always good to look back and try to look at the values and the mission of the university. So please join us at the Observatory of the Magna Carta. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcelo. Graham, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Naren. Yes, I mean, all to reflect upon it, I mean, I agree very much with what Marcello and Julian said, is that when we have these conversations and we talk globally and we hear in a short space of time, both the work that has been undertaken, what the size and scope of the challenges that are faced in different parts of the world, in the context of what is for virtually all of us an unprecedented global challenge, it doesn't appear very daunting that we can make any kind of impact on it, unless we are in very, very senior positions. And the level of that, because it seems so daunting, I think, again, when you have these huge global challenges, it almost seems like, well, what can we do? What can be done about it? And I guess my reflection is that we all have to can go away, I guess, and think what small steps we can take in our own institutions, our own contexts, to make equity, equitable access and participation part of what governments, students, institutions do moving forward to address some of the things we've seen here. How can we all take collectively small steps? I think it's only for those collective small steps we might see greater overall change. And again, that is, I suppose, also what WAHED is about. It's trying to act as a catalyst for many, many small steps to be taken by many, many people at different levels, right from practitioner level right to very senior level across the world. So I guess that's my reflection. I mean, I think, again, it's those small steps that really, really can make a huge difference. And it's keeping equity in the foremost of our minds when we make those small differences throughout the work that we all do.
Thank you, Graham. Last word, Professor Verghese.
I feel that what the pandemic teaches us in terms of higher education is that it is high time. This is more to Graham. We need to shift our focus on issues like equity, from equity in access to what happens in the institutions. Actually, what pandemic has showed us is that many a time inequalities can be increased in situations of pandemic and otherwise. So far as the academic enrichment program or academic programs are concerned, and how different students are faring differently. So therefore, there is an equally important dimension to address. While it is very important to address the issues of inequalities in access, we should also know, and we should also focus on what happens to the students once they are inside the campuses, inside the colleges and universities. That becomes an important dimension. Whereas I'm sure that Graham will take up this issue in the next time, because when you have a universalized system in the developed countries and a massified system in most of the developing countries, it becomes important that what is happening to the students, how the variations or differentiations or variations in learner achievement, in social skills that are picked up, can be substantially reduced. That becomes one of the important dimensions. And if I say in India, I'm making this point very strongly. In India today, the differences are increasing and widening in terms of what they access in the classrooms, what they absorb in the classrooms, because of the language issues, because of the preparedness of the students to come to this, because of the language issue itself. While most of the regional areas follow regional languages, the universities follow perhaps English language or national language. Both are Latin, Greek and Latin to the students who are coming to the colleges. So my final request and my final sentence is that we need to equally focus on inequalities arising out of, or inequalities that are happening at the learning levels and the absorption capacities of the students in the classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We've come to the end of our time together, and I've just been monitoring the positive responses on the chat room. Most have very complimentary things to say about the webinar. I thank you for that. But I particularly thank the presenters and speakers for really thought-provoking and illuminating reflections that have helped us to look at the issues of access and equity and also related issues from multiple perspectives. And I think we all go away with an enlarged understanding of the issues and the possibilities as well. I also thank the participants who've raised equally provocative questions and have made useful and illuminating comments that have also enlarged our understanding. So thank you all. There is an evaluation questionnaire which the MCO finds very useful to reflect on possible approaches and topics and the format and so on. So please fill that, take some time. It shouldn't take you more than a few minutes. The next webinar will be at 2:00 Central European Time on the 25th of March. And the focus will be on the European Universities Association report, which is called Universities Without Walls, A Vision for 2030. So please diarize that, and we hope to see you all there at that event. An email will be sent to you when the booking opens for it. So without further ado, I thank you once again. Special thanks to David and Carla for making this happen. And I bid you a from my side, a good evening. Until we see you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Narendra. Thank you, Narendra, for a good sharing.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.